any questions or things that you're working through that you want to get some feedback from the group, you'll have an opportunity to do that as well. So that we start off in terms of looking at data collection, because typically when we think about primary research, some of the common types of data collection that you're probably familiar with are things like observation or interviews or surveys. So these are sort of some of the common types of data collection that's involved usually when we're doing primary research. And I don't think Mike is here. I was going to say, I think Mike is actually doing survey. And I know, Kevin, you're doing primary research as well. Are you doing surveys or interviews?
Yeah, I'm actually transcribing a series of interviews right now. Sorry.
Excellent, which is always...
I don't know if you heard me or not. I'm trying to get the mic going here. Did you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay.
So you're doing transcription. So yeah, a lot of times, you know, when you're doing primary research, a lot of what you'll end up doing in terms of your data analysis is doing things like analyzing transcripts or doing analysis on questionnaire responses. So the main difference is that aside from Kevin and Mike, most of us are going to be doing more of a metasynthesis. So in this case, our data collection really is the literature that we've been collecting. So our data is the existing literature, which is a little bit different than typically what you might be used to in terms of primary research. So just want to talk a little bit about what that might look like in terms of the differences and some of the things to keep in mind when you're selecting your data and looking at your data collection. So a couple of things. So once you've, in terms of your data collection, now that you've got your existing literature, and I think most of you from last semester probably had a good sense of the articles or the pieces that you're going to be including and starting to look at in terms of your metasynthesis. But essentially, when you're looking at your data collection, probably the biggest things to keep in mind in terms of determining what's going to make up your actual data is that out of your search and literature, you're going to be determining what are sort of your inclusion and exclusion criteria. And a lot of times this sort of goes to things like time cutoff. So you might look at just including, let's say, peer-reviewed articles from 2000 until present, or you may even go beyond that, but typically you might have some sort of cutoff date that usually helps to sort of narrow down your pool. You can also have things like the setting, so you might only include, let's say, Canadian studies, or if you were looking at something more specific, you could even say Ontario universities, for example. So you might then sort of start to determine what you're going to include, and then you might also have some exclusion criteria. So you might exclude, let's say, things like unpublished dissertations or studies that are just theoretical in nature. So you'll sort of, in terms of determining your data collection, you'll be able to have these kind of your inclusion-exclusion criteria, which are going to start to narrow down your data that you're going to start using for your synthesis. And then you're also going to probably choose where you're going to look for that data. So in terms of what types of databases you're going to look at, and then what are your kind of search terms and keywords. So that's kind of in terms of looking at your data. These are the things that are going to help you narrow down what you're actually going to include in your data set. And Liz, I'm going to pick on you a little bit. That's the problem now of being one of my mentors, is I get to pick on you. Liz, do you want to talk a little bit about the process you've gone through in terms of determining your inclusion-exclusion criteria and some of those search terms? Do you mind if I pick on you?
No, I don't mind at all, but I was thinking of changing what I was doing again. See, this is what happens when you pick on me. One of the things I was, you know, we're talking about doing metasynthesis in this, so we're looking at what works in terms of the literature, what works and what you're looking at. So in my case, if I'm looking at mobile technology, one of the things that it doesn't look at is what works under what circumstances, so that kind of context piece. And I recently was shown something, it's called realist synthesis, and I wondered if anybody had heard of that who's done literature. Because it would appear it's relatively new, but it's sort of taking it a little bit of a step further, and I'm not sure if people who do real research say, we're not ready for that yet. So I just wanted to kind of ask that. Anyone ever heard of realist synthesis? All right, well, I'll keep researching and figuring out. Okay, if you're going to ask me stuff, I have to pull up my paper, Jordan.
All right, I just know that you had done some work. Liz had mentioned she actually has a librarian that was a good friend of hers, so she was helping her kind of figure out some of these pieces in terms of coming up with what are some good keywords, what are some inclusion, exclusion criteria. So the realist one I haven't heard of. That's new for me, so something to look at.
Okay, I'm going to read more about it. So what she did do is she explained to me that depending upon the database that you're working on, the search terms, the key search terms that you use are going to be different. So, for example, if I'm looking at Medline and some stuff, what they call mobile technology might be different than what it's called if I'm looking at database or another database or one of the education databases. So she was explaining to me how you have to really look at the search terms. I did put a bunch of this information in my blog to try and sort of share that and explain it, but I didn't actually transcribe it until near the end, like all the rest of us when we were actually done. But she's really helped me to try and understand that it isn't so easy as just saying I'm going to look at, you know, electronic stuff, or I'm going to look at mobile technology. You have to really think about what your key terms are. Otherwise, you're going to get too much information, or you're going to get not enough information. So you really have to put a bit of a broad lens when you're looking. I don't know if that's helpful.
That is. Thanks, Liz. I know I put you on the spot, so thank you. So yeah, and I remember, and I just found that helpful in terms of thinking. It is important in terms of your key terms and what you're using, and yeah, you might find depending on your initial search, so some of your key terms, if they're very broad, you might end up getting way too much, or may be too specific. So again, just some things to keep in mind when you're doing that search, and how you're going to be able to sort of narrow it down and select the articles that you're going to be working on. So I just wanted to give you an example of what this might look like sort of in context. So this is an example of a meta-synthesis that was done looking at the issue of internet addiction, which I'm sure none of us suffer from. Me, definitely not. So what they did is they actually, in their study, they determined which specific databases they were looking at. So they actually outlined in their methodology the databases that they were going to be searching. And again, depending on the databases, Liz mentioned, some of them might have used different terminology. So you might use different search terms depending on the database. And then again, they actually outlined the keywords that they were going to be using. So when you're thinking about your methodology, this is some of the things you might want to include in terms of which databases are you searching, and then what are your key terms or your search. And so then they outlined what their sort of inclusion exclusion criteria. And in this case, their inclusion criteria was qualitative studies. They had to be peer reviewed. They dealt specifically with the topic of internet addiction, and they were using primary data. So again, your inclusion criteria will be up to you. You will determine what this is, but typically you're going to have some specific criteria that's going to determine which articles you're going to keep, and then your exclusion things are things that you're going to maybe not necessarily include. There might be a couple things in there that you're going to use as exclusion criteria. So you might not include things like unpublished papers or things of that nature as well. So just an example of how they sort of outlined their inclusion exclusion criteria. And then, so what ends up happening, this is just from their paper in terms of narrowing it down, is they started with 140 articles in their initial search. And then once they started to apply their inclusion exclusion criteria, you'll notice it starts to really narrow it down. And then in this case, you'll sort of come up with what your major articles are that you'll be able to use. So that's kind of the typical process that you would follow in terms of doing your data collection. And I just wanted to again, open up if anyone wants to add or comment in terms of other strategies or tips or things that you've done when you've kind of done data collection. See if anyone else wants to add.
I can't speak directly to the data collection because I haven't actually done anything but the transcribing right now, but I can tell you anyone that's transcribing, my tip to them is to give yourself a lot more time than you think, because it's a very lengthy process, and I find myself constantly having to go back through it and sort of go through it over and over again. So I think one of the things I'm learning personally from it is just, how to budget my time correctly, because I think when I first took it on, I just thought I'd just listen to it once and I'd bang it out, but that's not the case. Sometimes I sit there and have to re-listen to it over and over again. So I guess just learning how to manage your time would be the tip I'd give out.
Thanks, Kevin. And I actually took the easy way out this time around. I actually hired someone to do my transcription for me for my current research for that same reason, just the amount of time that it takes. It is definitely a very time-consuming process. So good to keep in mind if anyone is doing actual transcription of primary data. It does take quite a bit of time. So Kevin, it's good that you know now. You can sort of budget that time as well. And Ron was just putting a note in there and some helpful resources as well, so definitely. And I think some of you had already, looking at your methodology, some of you had already sort of gone through this process in terms of documenting your process. But if you haven't, these are a few things to consider when you're writing up that piece of your methodology around the data collection, some of the stuff that you might want to include. So then once you've essentially determined, and through your inclusion and exclusion criteria and your search terms, you'll actually find the articles that you're going to be using that are essentially going to make up the data for your metasynthesis. The next step really is to go through those articles and start to determine what are some common themes, common ideas. So you're really going to start doing a bit of a thematic analysis based on the articles that become your data, essentially. And this is my example, Ron. This is the one where you weren't sure what this was. So your process, it will really depend on, I think everybody, when you're sort of doing a thematic analysis, will have a bit of a different process. Mine is very messy, and as much as I like technology, I'm actually, typically I've got, and actually I have a bunch of them here, I use my highlighters and my little sticky notes. And I typically do it in a more hard copy fashion. I have all my papers printed out. I get all my different highlighters. I sort of start coding with different colors. And then eventually I'll usually through that eventually take it and digitize it. But I tend to be more of a sort of hard copy type person. Whereas other people I know will use different software tools. Some people will use things like NVivo or Atlas TI. So there's lots of different ways to sort of approach your data analysis, and you'll find certain things work better for certain people. But this is sort of what mine tends to look like. That's what this messy picture was, is it's usually a bit chaotic and all over the place with lots of colors and sticky notes. And again, I don't know for the other faculty mentors, when you're doing thematic analysis, if anyone wants to share maybe what their process is like, if it looks anything like this, or maybe it's a little more structured.
I'll go. I actually have from my research is one of my methodologies is called independent phenomenological analysis, and it's very qualitative based, and it specifically looks at doing something like this where mainly for transcripts and interviews about organizing it thematically. So I would end up, once I actually start doing those interviews, I'd be doing a similar process to this. For my lit review, I do something as well like this where I've taken all of my the quotes or the information I found, I have it just on one large document, and then print it out, go through each line, do a different highlighting depending on which theme I'm looking at, and then I break it out from there. I find that it's easier for me that way because I'm constantly rereading the material, and it gets me more and more familiar with it. But it's, for anyone who wants to take a look at it, it's also called IPA. It's a nice one if it's very narrative based as well, so if it's very qualitative focused for your research, it might be something to take a read.
Thanks, Daniel. We're already thinking about beer, so I'm not sure where where that's taking us. But thank you. And I didn't know any others. I don't know. Again, Katie or Wendy, I know some of you have probably done some thematic analysis. If you have any sort of tricks of the trades or processes that you tend to use when you're doing your thematic analysis.
No, I'm a paper and highlighter person. It's messy.
That's what I was. Me too.
I've done mine using Word, the comments section, the little bubbles outside. And they're color coded.
Okay, that's a nice way of doing it too. Excellent. So good. I don't feel so bad that yours kind of looks a little bit messy like mine does. So again, what you'll find is everybody sort of has a different approach, and what you'll find is you'll probably play around with a few different things and find what works for you. Again, there's lots of different tools available to you. So there's a lot of different software that you can try and different free things you can try in terms of apps. So lots of different opportunities. But yeah, sometimes I find just a lot of times if I just sit in a room with a lot of paper and a big whiteboard, sometimes that helps as well. So it does get a little bit messy, but that's kind of the fun part really in terms of your next steps in terms of your research. This really gets down to the fun part. And Roland just posted a good link here as well, so thank you. So again, I just wanted to chat a little bit. When Kate was here last week, she showed you a few examples, and I just wanted to highlight a few more in terms of some different ways you might want to, once you've done your thematic analysis, how you might want to structure it and display that information. Again, this can be helpful for to include in your paper, but also for yourself in terms of organizing it and structuring it for yourself. So I'm just going to make this, you probably can't see this very well, a little bit bigger here. But you can see here's an example. A lot of times you'll see using a table or a chart can be helpful. So in this case, what this author's done is they've created their themes down the one side, and then they've put where they found that information in the articles that it relates to. So again, once they've sort of distilled that information down, they've come up with the themes, and then they're kind of attaching back to where they found those within the articles. Another good example in this case, this one's actually a little bit more specific, which is kind of nice. What they've done in this one is they've actually taken the themes and then they've pulled out specific quotes from the different articles that go back to those themes. And then what they've done here is they've just used a numbering system. So the numbers go back to the actual articles. So what you could do is you could sort of just, however many articles you have, you can just number them 1 to whatever, and then you could use that as a way to back and forth when you're doing your themes as well. So again, there's lots of different ways to trying it out. And again, similar experience here where they've actually just taken the themes, some descriptions, and then reference back to the articles. So again, lots of different ways that you can do that, and just wanted to show you a few examples because you'll probably, as you start to get into that phase, it's helpful to have a few different, I find, examples to kind of see how you might want to go about structuring it when you start to get to this place. And Kevin was mentioning Excel as well. That's another one. I think Roland saying that's something that he tends to use as well, is actually doing the same type of thing but in a spreadsheet. So actually creating your themes in the different columns and then filling them in as well. So that's another great tool for organizing yourself and keeping things straight. It's also really helpful for your lit review. I think we saw an example last time about, or last semester, how to do that as well.